Can you imagine that Hamilton's car in Ferrari was so broken that he had to reschedule his way of driving curve to survive the Grand Prize? What did Frédéric Vasseur see that left him completely furious? Today we are going to reveal the most alarming discovery of the season so far, which could radically change Ferrari's technical future. Singapore is not just an urban circuit. It is a precision trap. A place where errors are magnified and where the teams reveal unintentionally the true health of their cars. Under those brilliant lights of Marina Bay, Ferrari not only had a bad weekend. What happened was much deeper and more dangerous. It all started as any other classification in an urban circuit, with maximum tension and millimeter strategies. But for Frédéric Vasseur, something did not square. From the box's wall, Ferrari chief noticed inconsistencies in the telemetry of Hamilton's SF25. Data that at first glance might seem small mismatches, but that for someone with their experience were signs of a serious anomaly. Vasseur, an obsessive training engineer with the details, decided to break the protocol. Ordered a data crossing between real-time telemetry and pilot simulation maps. This tool is not normally used in the middle of Q2, much less in classification. It only uses it when the situation justifies it. And this time, justification was urgent. What he found left him ice cream. Each curve, each braking, each acceleration in the Hamilton SF25 showed adjustments that were not in the predefined maps of the car or in the pre-configured strategies. The most disturbing thing was that these changes did not come from the wall. They were not orders of the career engineer. They were not authorized. They came from Hamilton. Lewis, with the experience of a 7-time champion, was actively correcting the car's behavior from inside the cabin. Literally, it modified its real-time piloting style to keep SF25 on the track. It wasn't just talent. It was survival. The car did not give him confidence. But instead of surrendering or complaining on the radio, Hamilton began to adapt each braking, each line of traced, each curve entrance to compensate for an erratic behavior that no one in Ferrari understood. Why did the car react different on each lap? Why did it seem that the brakes overheated faster than normal? Lewis's driving style became dynamic software, a code that was rewriting curve to curve without external help. He adjusted weight transfers with the body, dosing the slowdown braking, let out the accelerator in areas where it can normally be stomping thoroughly. And all this while trying to qualify for one of the most demanding paths of the calendar. In the technical area of paddock, Vasseur had no doubt. There was something deeply bad in SF25. And it was not a configuration error. It was a concept failure. It was not enough to check the setup. The car was hiding a fundamental weakness, and Hamilton, unintentionally, had been the only one capable of demonstrating it completely, simply trying to keep it alive during the classification. What most bothered Vasseur was not only the technical problem itself, but the possibility that this structural fragility had been there from the design of the car. If a pilot has to reinvent his piloting to operate a first-level car, then the problem is not piloting. The problem is from the car. And that, for a team like Ferrari with the resources, the history and the pressure that loads on their shoulders, is absolutely unacceptable. What happened in Marina Bay was the first visible crack in the optimistic speech of the Scuderia. A clear message for the entire factory in Maranello. The SF25 as conceived is not only difficult to handle, it is unstable in its nucleus. And it was at that time, in the midst of the classification with the data in front of him and his pilot remaking the car from within, when Frédéric Vasseur understood that this was not going to be a normal year. This was a structural problem. And a time bomb, which had just started its countdown in full GP of Singapore. The classification had been an alarm signal. But the real nightmare began when the lights went out and the Singapore Grand Prix began. At first glance, Hamilton's career was not especially prominent. He did not fight for victory or was involved in dramatic incidents on the track. However, what happened inside his car was a totally different story. One that almost ends in the worst way. As the laps progressed, Lewis began reporting an anomalous sensation on the rear brake on the radio. At first, the team thought it was a normal thermal fluctuation, something common in an urban circuit with constant accelerations and braking. But Hamilton's voice did not transmit discomfort. He transmitted urgency. And then came the message that shook the entire garage. I can't stop the car. The brakes don't work. The pedal is on the floor. At that time, the wall was paralyzed. No one knew what to answer. What Lewis was describing was a total loss of the braking system, right in a circuit where 100% of the brakes is required for almost 50% of the lap. What the team would discover later was even more scary. Ferrari's SF25 suffered from a critical failure in the brake-by-wire system. This system is a hybrid component that combines the traditional hydraulic brake with the MGUK energy recovery system, all coordinated by an electronic switchboard responsible for distributing the braking power between the front and rear axle. When this balance is broken, the car simply does not stop. During the middle stinto, the temperature of the rear brakes had exceeded the maximum operating values. This not only reduced the braking efficacy, but completely annulled the response of the electronic system in certain track sections. Telemetry showed a pressure loss in the rear hydraulic circuit just when leaving curve 10. In normal conditions, that area requires a 4.5 G braking. Hamilton was doing it with just 40% of that capacity. The system collapsed because the aerodynamic architecture of the car designed to channel the air flow below the ground and maximize the soil effect had left the refrigeration of the brakes completely exposed. To gain time in line, Ferrari had closed air inlets to extreme levels. That decision, designed for pure performance, became a technical suicide in urban conditions of high thermal load. From the outside, fans saw a red car defending position. Inside, Hamilton was driving blindly, not knowing if in the next curve the car would stop or throw it straight to the wall. Fernando Alonso, upon learning on the radio of the situation, was direct. If the brakes are not working, that car should not continue on the track. It is a risk for all. And he was right. The team, without being able to solve anything at a distance, opted for the only possible strategy. Ask Lewis to manage the car as if the brakes did not exist. To lift before. That will avoid attacks. That will sacrifice rhythm. It was a desperate request, a tactical surrender in full combat. But the priority was no longer scored. It was to survive. And yet, the British did not abandon. During the last 15 laps, Hamilton piloted the SF-25 without functional rear brakes, regulating the car with the gear change, with the accelerator, and even with mass transfers when moving the steering wheel. Each braking was a prayer. Each curve a survival calculation. The most disconcerting is that this failure was not the product of an accident or a human error. It was a direct consequence of a design decision taken in the conceptual phase of the SF-25. The maximum performance search through aerodynamic efficiency led to ignore a basic rule in F1. Without brakes, there is no career. Vasseur's frustration grew when engineers confirmed what he feared. It was not a defective piece. It was not a montage error. It was a structural failure of the rear cooling system. An error that could have cost a catastrophic accident in one of the closest and most demanding calendar paths. Hamilton crossed the goal. He did not win. He didn't even add great points. But what he did was much more important. He revealed that the SF-25 was not only inconsistent, it was potentially insecure. And when a team like Ferrari, with its history, its budget, and its political weight in Formula One, puts a car with that level of fragility, there are no excuses that are worth. That night in Marina Bay, what was broken were not just the brakes of the car. It was Frédéric Vasseur's confidence in his own technical project. And the worst was yet to come. At the time Lewis Hamilton came down from SF-25, the gesture on his face said everything. The pilot had done what few can, survive a race with a car that, in real terms, was broken. But while the media focused on the results, within the Ferrari box a tense silence reigned. The type of silence that precedes a storm. Frédéric Vasseur is not a team leader. He is a methodical engineer, a strategist with years of experience in technical structures. It does not respond with free emotion. But what he discovered that night in Marina Bay was serious enough to get him out of his usual contained tone. The reports that arrived at their mobile office confirmed their darker suspicions. The SF-25 had a design error in its rear brake cooling system. Not an operational error, not a punctual failure, but a structural weakness born in the Maranello wind tunnel, months before a single wheel rotated on the track. During the design process of the SF-25, the aerodynamic equipment had opted for an aggressive solution. Closed the air inlets in the rear of the car to maximize the air flow under the ground. This sought to feed the soil effect, generating more aerodynamic load without penalizing resistance in line. On paper it was brilliant. On the track, it was a disaster. Frédéric Vasseur ordered the creation of a technical crisis committee to urgently redesign the rear cooling shots. This, by itself, already implies compromising a substantial part of the original development plan. Any aerodynamic modification, especially in areas of influence of soil flow, requires CFD simulations, wind tunnel validations, thermal analysis, and above all, time. And time is exactly what Ferrari does not have. Meanwhile, Maranello has implemented what they internally call a contingency mode, A career configuration version in which the extreme use of the brakes in classification is limited and the energy recovery maps are adjusted to avoid overheating. This solution, however, compromises performance, which means that, in the next grid awards, Ferrari could sacrifice grid positions simply to avoid another technical collapse. Do you think Ferrari can turn this technical crisis before it is too late? Do you think Hamilton did the right thing to risk so on track with a potentially insecure car? Leave it in the comments.